Sarah Martinez stared at the imposing glass doors of 140kg Gym, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped her worn duffel bag. At 28 years old, she had never felt more out of place. The perfectly sculpted bodies visible through the windows seemed to mock her insecurities. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman who had struggled with weight her entire life, someone who had been called chubby since childhood and had internalized every cruel comment. The decision to join this particular gym hadn't been easy. 140kg was known as the place where serious athletes trained, where Instagram fitness models built their empires, and where weekend warriors pushed themselves to their limits. Sarah had chosen it specifically because she was tired of the judgment she faced at smaller community gyms. She thought a larger, more professional environment might offer her the anonymity she craved. Walking through those doors felt like entering a different world. The sound of clanging weights filled the air, mixed with the rhythmic pounding of feet on treadmills and the occasional grunt of someone pushing through a difficult set. The smell of disinfectant and sweat created an oddly motivating atmosphere. Sarah had done her research, watching countless YouTube videos about proper gym etiquette and basic exercises. She had even practiced some movements at home using water bottles as weights. Her first few visits went relatively smoothly. She stuck to the cardio machines during off-peak hours, arriving early in the morning when fewer people were around. The elliptical became her safe space, a machine she could use without drawing attention to herself. She would put in her earbuds, select a mindless TV show on the screen, and lose herself in the repetitive motion for 30 to 45 minutes. But Sarah had bigger aspirations than just cardio. She had read about the benefits of strength training for women, how it could boost metabolism, improve bone density, and create the lean, strong physique she secretly dreamed of having. The weight section of the gym called to her, but it also terrified her. It was dominated by men who seemed to know exactly what they were doing, moving confidently between machines and free weights like they owned the place. The women she observed in the weight area fell into two categories: those who were clearly experienced and moved with the same confidence as the men, and those who were accompanied by personal trainers or boyfriends who guided their every movement. Sarah fit into neither category. She was alone, inexperienced, and acutely aware of how different she looked from the other women who ventured into that section of the gym. Her breakthrough moment came during her third week of membership. Sarah had been watching a group of women perform deadlifts, fascinated by the movement and the obvious strength it required. She had researched the exercise extensively online, understanding that it was considered one of the most effective compound movements for building overall strength. Something about the deadlift appealed to her on a fundamental level. It wasn't about looking pretty or graceful. It was about raw power and determination. That particular morning, the gym was quieter than usual. Sarah had arrived at 6 a.m., hoping to avoid the evening crowd that made her feel self-conscious. She approached the area where the barbells were stored, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. She had watched enough videos to understand the basics: feet hip-width apart, hands just outside her legs, chest up, back straight, and lift with her legs and hips rather than her back. She started with just the empty barbell, which weighed 45 pounds. Even that felt heavy in her hands, but there was something satisfying about the weight of it. She practiced the movement slowly, focusing on her form rather than the weight. The motion felt natural, like her body was designed for this particular exercise. She could feel muscles engaging that she didn't even know she had. For the next several days, Sarah continued to practice with just the empty bar. She would arrive early, claim a small section of the weight area, and work through her sets methodically. She watched other lifters out of the corner of her eye, learning from their techniques and building her confidence with each session. The deadlift was becoming more than just an exercise. It was becoming her gateway into a world she had always felt excluded from. But Sarah's peaceful introduction to strength training was about to be disrupted. As she became more comfortable with the movement and began adding small amounts of weight to the bar, she started to attract attention. Not all of it would be welcome. The gym's social hierarchy was complex and often unforgiving. There were the regulars who had been training there for years, the newcomers trying to establish themselves, and the casual members who came and went without making much of an impression. Sarah was clearly in the newcomer category, but her dedication and consistent presence were starting to make her more visible. Some members began to take notice of the determined woman who showed up every morning, working quietly in her corner of the weight room. A few offered friendly nods or words of encouragement. Others, however, seemed less impressed by her efforts. Sarah could feel eyes on her, hear whispered comments that she couldn't quite make out but suspected weren't flattering. The atmosphere was building toward something, though Sarah couldn't have predicted what was coming. Her morning routine had become the anchor of her day, the thing that made her feel strong and capable. She was sleeping better, standing taller and beginning to see small changes in her body composition. The number on the scale hadn't changed dramatically, but her clothes fit differently and she felt more solid, more grounded. What Sarah didn't realize was that her quiet determination was about to be tested in a way she never could have imagined. The gym's unspoken social dynamics were about to collide with her growing confidence, setting the stage for a confrontation that would either break her spirit or forge her into something stronger than she ever thought possible. As she prepared for another early morning session, adding a few more pounds to her deadlift, Sarah had no idea that her journey was about to take a dramatic turn. The foundation she had been building, both physical and mental, was about to be put to the ultimate test. The morning that changed everything started like any other. Sarah arrived at FitCore at her usual time, 6:15 a.m., when the gym was still relatively quiet. She'd been deadlifting consistently for 6 weeks now, gradually increasing the weight, from the empty 45-pound bar to a respectable 95 pounds. While this might not have impressed the powerlifters who regularly moved 300 pounds or more, it represented a massive personal victory for Sarah. Each 5-pound increase had been earned through sweat, determination, and careful attention to her form. She sat up in her usual spot near the windows, where the morning light helped her maintain focus on her technique. The routine had become meditative, rolling her shoulders back, approaching the bar with confidence, setting her grip, and taking a deep breath before each lift. Today felt different, though. She felt stronger, more grounded, ready to challenge herself with a weight that had seemed impossible just weeks earlier. As Sarah warmed up with lighter weights, she noticed the gym beginning to fill with its usual morning crowd. There was Marcus, the bodybuilder who always wore tank tops that showed off his massive arms. Janet, the marathon runner who could spend hours on the treadmill without breaking a sweat. And then there was the group that had started to make her uncomfortable. 3 women in their early 20s who seemed to spend more time taking selfies than actually working out. These women, led by a blonde named Brittany, had been making increasingly obvious comments about other gym members. Sarah had overheard them criticizing people's form, questioning whether certain individuals belonged in a serious gym like FitCore, and generally establishing themselves as the unofficial judges of who was worthy of their shared space. So far, Sarah had managed to avoid their direct attention, but she could feel that changing. Today, Brittany and her friends had positioned themselves at the leg press machine, which gave them a clear view of Sarah's deadlifting area. As Sarah loaded the bar with 100 pounds for the first time, she could hear their conversation becoming louder and more pointed. Words like embarrassing and someone should tell her drifted across the space between them. Sarah tried to block out the negativity and focus on her lift. 100 pounds was a significant milestone for her, representing more than double her starting weight. She approached the bar with the same careful attention to form that had served her well, but she could feel her confidence wavering under the scrutiny she was receiving. The first rep went smoothly. The weight came up clean, and Sarah felt the familiar satisfaction of a successful lift. But as she reset for her second repetition, Brittany's voice cut through the gym's ambient noise with surgical precision. "Oh my God, look at her trying to deadlift. Someone's going to get hurt." The comment wasn't whispered or subtle. It was loud, enough for several other gym members to hear, and Sarah felt every pair of eyes in the vicinity turn toward her. Her face flushed red, and suddenly the bar in her hands felt impossibly heavy. The weight that had felt manageable moments before now seemed to mock her presumption that she belonged in this space. "I mean, seriously, where's her trainer? You can't just watch a YouTube video and think you know how to lift," Brittany continued, clearly enjoying the attention her commentary was receiving from her friends. "Some people need to stick to the cardio machines." Sarah's hands were shaking now, but not from the weight of the bar. The humiliation was overwhelming, made worse by the fact that she had been so proud of her progress just moments before. She could feel other gym members glancing in her direction, some with sympathy, others with curiosity about the drama unfolding in the weight room. For a moment, Sarah considered putting the bar down and walking away. The voice in her head that had criticized her for years was suddenly amplified by Brittany's public humiliation. Maybe she was right. Maybe Sarah didn't belong here. Maybe she was fooling herself into thinking she could be strong. But something else stirred within her, something that had been growing stronger with each successful lift over the past 6 weeks. It was a quiet voice that reminded her of how far she had come, of the early mornings when she had pushed through her fear to try something new, of the satisfaction she felt when the weight came off the ground cleanly and under control. Instead of backing down, Sarah took a deep breath and completed her second rep, then her third. She finished her set methodically, focusing on her breathing and her form while ignoring the continued commentary from Brittany's group. With each successful lift, she could feel her confidence returning, not just in her ability to move the weight but in her right to occupy this space. After completing her final rep of the set, Sarah carefully lowered the bar to the ground and stood up straight. She made direct eye contact with Brittany for the first time, not with anger or defiance, but with a quiet dignity that seemed to catch the other woman off guard. There was no dramatic confrontation, no raised voices or verbal sparring. Sarah simply acknowledged that she had heard the criticism and chosen not to be diminished by it. The interaction might have ended there, with Sarah proving to herself that she could withstand public embarrassment and continue pursuing her goals. But Brittany wasn't finished. Perhaps encouraged by what she interpreted as Sarah's meekness or maybe simply unable to let go of an audience that seemed entertained by her performance, she decided to escalate the situation. "I'm just saying, for everyone's safety, maybe some people should get proper instruction before they try to lift heavy weights," Brittany announced to the general vicinity, her voice dripping with false concern. "It's a liability issue, really." This time the comment sparked reactions from other gym members. A few people nodded in agreement, but others seemed uncomfortable with the public nature of the criticism. Marcus, the bodybuilder, shook his head and muttered something about gym etiquette. Janet, the runner, looked up from her treadmill with obvious disapproval. Sarah realized that this moment was about more than just her own feelings. Brittany's behavior was creating an atmosphere that could make anyone feel unwelcome, anyone who didn't fit her narrow definition of who belonged in the gym. Other members were watching to see how this would resolve, perhaps wondering if they might be next if their own efforts were deemed inadequate. The weight of that responsibility, combined with her growing anger at being used as entertainment, began to transform Sarah's embarrassment into something more powerful. She was tired of being the target of other people's insecurities, tired of apologizing for taking up space, tired of allowing bullies to define her worth based on their own narrow perspectives. As she prepared for her next set, Sarah made a decision that would change not just the trajectory of this confrontation, but the entire course of her fitness journey. She was going to add more weight to the bar. The decision to add weight wasn't made out of spite or a desire to prove anyone wrong. As Sarah stood there, feeling the eyes of half the gym on her, something fundamental shifted in her mindset. The weeks of consistent training, the gradual progression, the careful attention to form, all of it had been building toward this moment without her realizing it. She wasn't just physically stronger than when she had started. She was mentally prepared for a challenge that 6 weeks ago would have seemed impossible. Sarah walked to the weight rack and selected 2 10-pound plates. Adding them to the bar would bring her total to 120 pounds, a 20-pound jump that was larger than any single increase she had attempted before. Under normal circumstances, she would have approached such a jump cautiously, perhaps adding only 5 or 10 pounds to test her limits gradually. But these weren't normal circumstances. As she loaded the plates onto the bar, she could hear Brittany's commentary continuing in the background, but the words seemed to fade into white noise. Sarah's focus was narrowing to a single point, the barbell in front of her and the challenge it represented. She had studied powerlifting videos obsessively, not just for the technique but for the mental preparation. She understood that strength was as much about confidence and mental focus as it was about muscle fiber and training adaptation. The gym had grown noticeably quieter. Other members had paused their workouts to watch what was unfolding, sensing that something significant was happening. Even Brittany's friends seemed to realize that their leader's mockery might have triggered something unexpected. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, like the moment before a storm breaks. Sarah approached the loaded barbell with more deliberation than usual. She took her time setting her feet, ensuring her stance was perfect. Hip-width apart, toes slightly turned out, shins close to the bar but not touching. She bent at the hips and knees, reaching down to grip the bar with her hands positioned just outside her legs. The weight felt substantial in her hands, significantly heavier than anything she had attempted before. But as she prepared for the lift, Sarah realized that her preparation over the past 6 weeks hadn't just been physical. She had been building mental resilience without knowing it. Every morning that she had pushed through her anxiety to enter the gym, every time she had ignored sideways glances and focused on her own progress, every small victory she had celebrated privately, all of it had been preparing her for this moment. She took a deep breath, feeling her core muscles engage as she braced herself for the lift. The technique she had practiced dozens of times with lighter weights felt solid and natural. Drive through the heels, engage the glutes and hamstrings, keep the chest up and the back straight. The weight felt heavy as she initiated the movement, but it also felt manageable. The bar began to move. Slowly at first as Sarah's muscles adapted to the increased load, then with more confidence as she realized her body was capable of handling the challenge. The weight traveled up her shins, past her knees and toward her hips in one smooth, controlled movement. As the bar reached its full extension, Sarah stood tall, her shoulders back, holding 120 pounds with a composure that surprised even herself. The gym was completely silent for a moment. Then, from across the weight room came a single clap. It was Marcus, the bodybuilder who had been training there for years. His applause was joined by others, Janet from the treadmill, an older man who had been quietly doing bicep curls, even some of the other women who had been watching the confrontation unfold. But Sarah wasn't finished. As she lowered the weight back to the ground with the same control she had used to lift it, she made another decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She was going to attempt 140 pounds. This decision wasn't about showing off or proving a point to Brittany. It was about something deeper, a recognition that she had been underestimating herself for years, not just in the gym, but in every area of her life. She had allowed other people's opinions to define her limitations, accepting their assessment of what she was capable of achieving. But standing there with the successful lift behind her, Sarah realized that those limitations had been largely imaginary. The additional 20 pounds brought her total to 140 pounds, more than triple what she had started with 6 weeks earlier. It was a weight that would be respectable for anyone, regardless of their size or training history. More importantly, it was a weight that would require her to dig deeper than she ever had before, to find reserves of strength she wasn't even sure she possessed. As she loaded the additional plates onto the bar, Sarah could feel the energy in the gym shifting. What had started as an uncomfortable confrontation was transforming into something else entirely. Other members were no longer watching out of curiosity about drama. They were witnessing what might be a genuinely impressive athletic achievement. The supportive applause after her previous lift had created a different atmosphere, one where people were hoping she would succeed rather than waiting for her to fail. Brittany's group had fallen completely silent. Their leader's earlier confidence seemed to evaporate as she realized that her target was not only unintimidated by the criticism, but was using it as motivation to achieve something remarkable. The dynamic had reversed entirely. Instead of Sarah being on display as an object of ridicule, Brittany was now the one being scrutinized by other gym members, many of whom clearly disapproved of her behavior. Sarah took even more time preparing for this lift. 140 pounds was serious weight, demanding respect and careful preparation. She visualized the movement in her mind, feeling each phase of the lift before she even touched the bar. The setup needed to be perfect: her feet position, her grip, her breathing, her mental state. She had learned from the powerlifting videos that the biggest lifts weren't just about physical strength. They required complete coordination between mind and body. As she approached the bar for what everyone sensed would be the culminating moment of this unexpected drama, Sarah felt a calmness she hadn't experienced before in the gym. The anxiety that had plagued her for weeks was gone, replaced by a focused determination that seemed to radiate from her core. She was no longer the insecure woman who had worried about taking up too much space or drawing unwanted attention. She had become someone who belonged exactly where she was, doing exactly what she was meant to be doing. The moment of truth was approaching, and everyone in the gym seemed to understand that they were about to witness something special. The loaded barbell sat before Sarah like a mountain waiting to be climbed. 140 pounds of steel and iron plates, more weight than she had ever imagined herself capable of moving when she first walked through the gym's doors. The number itself seemed impossibly large, but as she stared down at the bar, Sarah felt something she had never experienced before in a gym setting: complete confidence in her ability to rise to the challenge. Her setup ritual had become more deliberate with each attempt. She rolled her shoulders back, shaking out any residual tension from the previous lifts. The chalk she had borrowed from Marcus felt gritty and reassuring in her palms, providing the grip security she needed for the heaviest attempt of her life. Around her, the gym had transformed into an impromptu amphitheater, with members positioning themselves to get a better view of what everyone sensed would be the defining moment of this unexpected drama. Sarah's breathing had settled into the deep, rhythmic pattern she had practiced during her lighter training sessions. She understood now that preparation for a maximum lift wasn't just about physical positioning. It was about creating a mental state that allowed her entire nervous system to coordinate around a single goal. The visualization techniques she had learned from online coaching videos suddenly made perfect sense as she mentally rehearsed each phase of the upcoming lift. As she bent down to grip the bar, Sarah noticed that her hands no longer shook with nervousness. The trembling that had plagued her earlier in the confrontation with Brittany had been replaced by steady determination. Her grip felt secure, her stance felt solid, and most importantly, her mind felt clear and focused. She had discovered something about herself in the space between being ridiculed and choosing to respond with action rather than retreat. The initial pull off the floor was the moment of truth. 140 pounds represented a weight that would either move or it wouldn't. There was no middle ground. Sarah engaged her legs and hips, driving through her heels as she had practiced countless times with lighter loads. For a split second, the bar seemed immovable, and she wondered if she had finally found the limit of her current strength. But then something shifted. Some combination of technique and determination clicked into place, and the weight began its upward journey. The lift wasn't pretty or effortless like those performed by the experienced powerlifters she had watched on YouTube. Sarah's face showed the strain of the effort, and her movement was deliberate rather than smooth. But the bar continued to rise, traveling up her shins with the grinding determination of someone who had decided that failure was not an acceptable outcome. Past her knees, the weight seemed to get lighter as her stronger hip muscles took over the movement. The moment when the bar passed her knees was when Sarah knew she had it. The most difficult portion of the deadlift was behind her, and the final extension to lockout, while still demanding, was within her capabilities. She could feel every muscle in her posterior chain working in coordination, from her calves to her upper back, all contributing to the collective effort of moving the weight upward against gravity's persistent pull. When Sarah finally stood erect, the bar locked out in her hands. The gym erupted in spontaneous applause. But this wasn't the polite acknowledgement she had received after her previous lift. This was genuine appreciation for witnessing an impressive feat of strength, made all the more remarkable by the circumstances that had led to it. Marcus let out a loud, "Hell yes." That echoed through the weight room. Janet had stopped her treadmill entirely and was clapping enthusiastically from the cardio area. But the most telling reaction came from the group of women who had started this entire sequence of events. Brittany and her friends were completely silent, their earlier mockery replaced by what appeared to be genuine shock. They had underestimated not just Sarah's physical capabilities but her mental resilience and determination. Their assumption that she would crumble under social pressure had been so thoroughly disproven that they seemed unsure how to process what they had just witnessed. Sarah held the weight at lockout for a moment longer than necessary, not out of showmanship but because she wanted to fully experience this moment of triumph. The bar felt solid and secure in her hands. No longer the impossible weight it had seemed just moments before. She had transformed it from an intimidating obstacle into evidence of her own capabilities, proof that the limitations she had accepted about herself were largely self-imposed. As she lowered the weight back to the ground with the same controlled movement she had used throughout her training, Sarah realized that something fundamental had changed in how she saw herself. The woman who had been afraid to venture into the weight room 6 weeks earlier no longer existed. In her place stood someone who had discovered that she was capable of far more than she had ever imagined. Not just physically, but in terms of her ability to handle adversity and pressure. The aftermath of the lift was almost as remarkable as the lift itself. Other gym members who had never spoken to Sarah before approached to congratulate her on the impressive deadlift. Marcus, whose approval she had never thought to seek, told her that her form was excellent and that 140 pounds was a solid lift for anyone, regardless of their size or experience level. Even some of the other women in the gym, who had previously seemed intimidating in their confidence and athleticism, acknowledged her achievement with genuine respect. But perhaps the most significant change was in how the other gym members now viewed Brittany and her group. Their behavior during the confrontation had revealed something unpleasant about their characters, and the contrast with Sarah's dignified response had not gone unnoticed. Several members made pointed comments about the importance of supporting each other in their fitness journeys, rather than tearing each other down. The social dynamics that had briefly favored the mean-spirited commentary had shifted decisively in favor of encouragement and mutual respect. As Sarah began to rack her weights and clean up her area, she reflected on how dramatically the morning had unfolded. She had arrived at the gym as someone who was still fighting to feel like she belonged, still vulnerable to the opinions and criticisms of others. She was leaving as someone who had proven to herself and everyone present that she belonged exactly where she was, doing exactly what she was doing. The transformation wasn't just about the weight she had lifted, impressive as that had been. It was about discovering that she had the strength to face down adversity, to respond to criticism with determination rather than retreat, and to exceed her own expectations when circumstances demanded it. The deadlift had become a metaphor for something much larger. Her ability to pick up challenges that seemed too heavy and find a way to overcome them through persistence and proper preparation. What Sarah didn't yet realize was that this morning's events would become the foundation for changes that would extend far beyond the gym, influencing how she approached challenges in every area of her life. The weeks following Sarah's breakthrough deadlift transformed her entire gym experience in ways she hadn't anticipated. Word of her impressive lift and dignified handling of Brittany's ridicule spread through FitCore's community, creating a ripple effect that changed how other members interacted with her and each other. What had started as a moment of personal triumph had somehow sparked a broader conversation about gym culture and the importance of supporting rather than undermining fellow fitness enthusiasts. Sarah's morning routine remained consistent, but everything else about her training evolved dramatically. The confidence she had discovered during that confrontational morning seemed to unlock potential she hadn't known existed. Her deadlift progression, which had been steady but cautious before, accelerated as she learned to trust her body's capabilities. Within 3 weeks, she was regularly lifting 150 pounds, and her form had become so solid that other members occasionally asked for technique advice. The transformation wasn't limited to her deadlifting. Emboldened by her success with that movement, Sarah began exploring other exercises she had previously considered too intimidating. Squats, which had once seemed impossibly complex and dangerous, became another avenue for strength development. Pull-ups, assisted at first but gradually progressing toward unassisted repetitions, challenged her upper body in ways that complemented her lower body gains. Her entire training philosophy shifted from simply trying to fit in to actively pursuing improvement and strength gains. Marcus, the bodybuilder who had been one of the first to applaud her achievement, became an unexpected mentor. His initial gesture of support had evolved into genuine friendship, and he began offering subtle guidance on programming and technique. Unlike the intimidating figure she had initially perceived him to be, Marcus revealed himself to be someone who genuinely cared about helping others succeed in their fitness journeys. His approval and guidance helped Sarah understand that the gym's most accomplished members were often its most supportive, contrary to the stereotypes she had carried about bodybuilders and serious lifters. The social dynamics at FitCore had shifted noticeably in the aftermath of the confrontation. Brittany and her group found themselves increasingly isolated as other members made it clear that they disapproved of bullying behavior. Their morning presence became less prominent, and when they were there, their interactions were much more subdued. Several members who had witnessed the original incident made pointed efforts to be encouraging and welcoming to newcomers, as if Sarah's example had reminded them of their responsibility to maintain a positive training environment. But the changes in Sarah's life extended far beyond the gym's walls. The confidence she had discovered through strength training began manifesting in other areas of her life with surprising intensity. At her job as a marketing coordinator, she found herself speaking up more in meetings, offering ideas she previously would have kept to herself out of fear of judgment. Her supervisor noticed the change, commenting that Sarah seemed more engaged and confident in her professional interactions. Her personal relationships also evolved as she carried her newfound self-assurance into social situations. Friends remarked that she seemed different, more present, and assertive. Dating, which had been a source of anxiety for years, became something she approached with curiosity rather than dread. The woman who had once defined herself primarily through other people's opinions was learning to trust her own judgment and value her own worth. The physical changes were obvious and dramatic. Sarah's body composition had altered significantly as she continued combining strength training with her cardiovascular work. She had lost fat while gaining muscle, creating a physique that was strong and functional rather than simply smaller. Her posture improved as her back and core muscles strengthened, giving her a presence she had never possessed before. Clothes fit differently, not just because of size changes, but because she carried herself with more confidence and dignity. Sleep quality improved as her body adapted to the physical demands of serious strength training. Energy levels throughout the day were higher and more consistent. Even her nutrition began changing naturally as she became more attuned to what her body needed to support her training goals. She found herself craving protein-rich foods and complex carbohydrates that would fuel her workouts. While processed foods and sugar became less appealing, the deadlift milestone had opened doors to a community she hadn't known existed. Other women at the gym began approaching her for advice and encouragement, sharing their own struggles with confidence and self-doubt. Sarah discovered that her experience wasn't unique. Many people carried similar insecurities and fears about judgment in gym settings. Her visible progress and positive attitude became a source of inspiration for others who were fighting their own battles with self-confidence. Social media, which Sarah had previously avoided due to her discomfort with her appearance, became a platform for sharing her fitness journey. Her posts about strength training and body positivity attracted a following of people who resonated with her message of self-improvement through determination rather than perfection. The woman who had once hidden from attention was now comfortable sharing her story and encouraging others to pursue their own fitness goals regardless of their starting point. Professional opportunities began emerging as Sarah's transformation became more visible. A local fitness supplement company approached her about representing their products, impressed by her authentic transformation story and positive social media presence. While she was cautious about commercial endorsements, the offer validated that her journey had value beyond her personal satisfaction. It was evidence that her story of overcoming adversity through determination resonated with others who might be struggling with similar challenges. The relationship with her family also improved as they witnessed her increased confidence and happiness. Years of well-meaning but misguided comments about her weight and appearance gave way to genuine admiration for her dedication and achievements. Family gatherings became opportunities to share her progress and inspire other relatives who were dealing with their own health and fitness challenges. As Sarah reflected on the months since her breakthrough deadlift, she realized that the weight she had lifted that morning was insignificant compared to the psychological barriers she had overcome. The external validation from other gym members had been encouraging, but the internal transformation was what truly mattered. She had learned that strength wasn't just about moving weight. It was about moving through life with confidence, purpose, and resilience. The woman who had once been afraid to take up space in a gym was now someone who created positive space for others, encouraging newcomers and supporting fellow members in their own journeys. Her transformation had become a catalyst for broader change in her gym's culture, proving that individual courage and determination could influence entire communities in positive ways. 1 year later, Sarah Martinez stood in the exact same spot where her transformation had begun, but everything about the moment was different. The woman gripping the loaded barbell was no longer the insecure newcomer who had once trembled at the thought of being judged. Instead, she was preparing for a deadlift that would have seemed impossible during those first terrifying weeks at 140kg Gym, 210 pounds, a weight that would officially qualify her for her first powerlifting competition. The gym around her had evolved too, though the changes were more subtle than her own transformation. The culture at 140kg had shifted toward greater inclusivity and mutual support. with experienced members actively mentoring newcomers and a zero-tolerance policy for the kind of bullying behavior that had once made Sarah's early visits so difficult. The management had even instituted new member orientation sessions, partly inspired by feedback about the need for better integration and support systems. Sarah's journey from that humiliating confrontation to this moment of triumph hadn't been linear or easy. There had been plateaus where her progress stalled, injuries that forced her to modify her training, and moments of self-doubt when she wondered if she was pushing too hard or too fast. But each challenge had become an opportunity to apply the resilience she had first discovered during that morning when Brittany's mockery had backfired so spectacularly. The powerlifting competition she was training for represented more than just a personal milestone. Sarah had become involved with a nonprofit organization that used strength training as therapy for women recovering from domestic violence and abuse. Her own story of finding inner strength through physical challenges resonated powerfully with women who were rebuilding their confidence and sense of self-worth after traumatic experiences. The competition would raise funds for the program while demonstrating that strength comes in many forms and can be developed at any stage of life. Marcus, now officially her training partner rather than just a mentor, stood nearby offering quiet encouragement as she prepared for her final warm-up set. Their friendship had become one of the most unexpected benefits of her transformation. The intimidating bodybuilder had revealed himself to be someone who valued character and determination above superficial appearances, and their training sessions had become highlights of Sarah's week. He had taught her that true strength was measured not just in pounds lifted, but in the courage to keep pushing forward when progress seemed impossible. The other members gathered around weren't there out of curiosity about potential drama, as they had been during that pivotal morning a year earlier. They were there to support someone they had watched grow from an uncertain beginner into an accomplished lifter who embodied the best values of their gym community. Janet, the marathon runner, had paused her cardio session to witness Sarah's attempt. Several newer members, many of whom had sought Sarah's guidance during their own fitness journeys, formed an encouraging semicircle around the lifting platform. What made this moment even more meaningful was the presence of other women Sarah had inspired over the months. There was Michelle, a single mother who had started deadlifting after watching Sarah's progress and was now preparing for her own first competition. Rebecca, a college student who had overcome an eating disorder partly through the body-positive strength training approach Sarah advocated, was documenting the attempt for Sarah's increasingly popular social media following. These women represented the ripple effect of courage, how one person's decision to face their fears could inspire others to confront their own limitations. Even more surprising was the presence of Brittany, who had approached Sarah the previous week with a genuine apology for her behavior during that confrontational morning. The year had been humbling for her as well, as she watched Sarah's transformation and reflected on her own insecurities that had driven her to tear others down. She had asked if she could be there for the big lift, not as a spectator but as someone who had learned important lessons about the power of encouragement versus criticism. Sarah's preparation ritual had become more sophisticated as her lifts had grown heavier, but the mental approach remained rooted in the confidence she had first discovered during her breakthrough moment. She closed her eyes and visualized not just the technical aspects of the lift, but the entire journey that had brought her to this point. The fear, the humiliation, the determination, the gradual building of strength and confidence, all of it had been necessary to create the person who was now capable of attempting a weight that represented more than quintupling her starting point. The loaded barbell looked different now than it had during her early training sessions. Instead of an intimidating obstacle that might defeat her, it appeared as a familiar challenge that she was well prepared to meet. 210 pounds was serious weight by any standard, but Sarah's training had progressed systematically to prepare her body and mind for exactly this moment. Her technique had been refined through hundreds of repetitions. Her strength had been built through careful programming and consistent effort, and her confidence had been earned through facing and overcoming progressively difficult challenges. As she approached the bar for her competition attempt, Sarah felt a calmness that would have been impossible during her early gym experiences. The anxiety that had once made her hands shake had been replaced by focused determination. She knew exactly what she needed to do, trusted her preparation completely, and was ready to demonstrate how far she had traveled. From the insecure woman who had once considered leaving the gym rather than facing criticism, the lift itself was a masterpiece of technique and determination. Sarah's setup was perfect. Her pull off the floor was smooth and controlled, and her lockout was solid and confident. As the weight reached its full extension and she stood tall with 210 pounds in her hands, the gym erupted in celebration that was both louder and more genuine than anything she had experienced before. But the real victory wasn't the weight on the bar or the approval of the crowd. It was the complete transformation of someone who had learned that strength isn't about being immune to criticism or fear. It's about facing those challenges and choosing to grow rather than retreat. Sarah had become living proof that the most important competition is always with the person you were yesterday, and that the heaviest weights we lift are often the limitations we place on ourselves.